Oh, hello. I think I solved the technical problems that we've been having, so that only leaves me to say welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where today I want to do one of these sort of freewheeling streams. Sometimes I try to keep it thematic, but at other times we just talk about stuff in the news and stuff on my mind. And we begin with a sad story, which is the death of Jerry Butler, one of the greatest singers and songwriters and all-around musicians in the wider soul and R&B movement. He was someone who got his start in the Impressions in their very earliest days in the late 50s. They would, of course, go on to see a lot of fame come their way because of Curtis Mayfield's involvement before he went solo. But Jerry Butler wrote so many songs for so many different great artists. Think people like Otis Redding, and his solo stuff, though, is where I really think he came to shine the most. And it was in the late 60s when he developed this Iceman persona. And this began to be, well, it got introduced to the world through his 1968 album, The Iceman Cometh, which is arguably his best album. He wrote or co wrote just about all of the songs on the album. And Thom Bell, the great producer and arranger of the great Philadelphia soul sound, think the electric sitars, the lush strings, those very distorted yet powerful horns. Think of bands like the Delphonics and the Stylistics and the Spinners. He was the lead arranger on this album. And even though it was different than your sort of typical Philadelphia soul album, it was much more sort of gritty and groovy. It had some of that element to it as well. It was just all around a great album. Some of my favorite songs were Hey Western Union Man, Strange I Still Love You, Never Give You Up. Really great stuff. And not to be outdone, he came out with a sequel to that album, Ice on Ice, in '69. And by this time, the Iceman was synonymous with Jerry Butler. He even did a collaboration the following year with Gene Chandler, who, of course, we remember as the Duke of Earl, among other things, another great singer. He was a prolific releaser, if that's a word, of albums. Jerry Butler was a prolific songwriter. And a bit of trivia for those outside of the sort of Cook County area, made famous by the Blues Brothers, for those of you know. Is that he was a local politician in Cook County and spent all of his sort of grown life in Chicago. And I don't want to comment on his political record, but he got elected and reelected many times from 1985 right up until recent years. One of the things, though, that I had to find funny about it is he at one point called for the largest sales tax increase of all time that the area had seen. I thought, come on, Jerry, that makes your records more expensive. What are you thinking? But we love him, and the music is great. The Not all of his albums have made their way onto the streaming services, but a lot of them had, including The Iceman Cometh, which is really just a legendary album of soul. It's one of those soul albums that everyone should hear, and everyone, they used to say everyone should own, but no one owns music anymore. They have subscriptions to streaming platforms. By the way, you can subscribe to me for some reason, even though I do this for free. But rest in peace, Jerry Butler, a really excellent musician and someone who made his mark on his community in activism and in politics as well. The other thing I wanted to talk about is something that came up in conversation, and this is the question of acoustic versus electric music, which is sort of a debate not as old as time, but it's certainly a debate as old as someone realized that you can take instruments and plug them in. And ever since then, people have argued about the comparative merits or demerits of amplified music. Now, I, for one, think that most of these debates are framed in the wrong way. Most of them are sort of framed around this snobbish narrative of anything that's new or novel, as an electric guitar or an electric organ once were, as more recently things like synthesizers were, and more recent than that, things like sequencers and samplers. If you plug it in, it is impure. Now, this is a bit of a Luddite attitude, it's a bit of a snobbish attitude. My attitude towards towards all music, whether we're talking about styles and genres, arrangements, instrumentations, or whether the thing is plugged into the wall or you could play it in a blackout. I say, is it good or is it bad? Does it have an emotive quality? Does it have a spiritual quality? Does it have a technical quality? These are all sort of broad ways that we can think about music, but it really all comes down to, is it good or is it bad? That's how the great maestro Wilhelm Furtwängler thought of music. It's how Miles Davis thought of music, and I'm sure others have articulated that as well. Hey, I just did, but I think that Furtwängler and Miles might be a bit more famous than I, as well they should be. But it came up in a very specific discussion with a musician that I've known for years and years. And she was saying that acoustic jazz sort of trios and quartets are sort of forced to have more sophisticated harmony than a lot of fusiony plugged in music because the sound is very naked. And that got me thinking that there's actually a lot of truth to that. Everyone knows the sound of a grand piano. And yes, every instrument is unique in the sound it makes, but the basic general sound that we can instantly identify as that of a grand piano, we all know it, and we've known it for hundreds of years. The sound itself is not particularly novel. The same is true with an acoustic upright bass. The same is true, pardon me, of a saxophone or a trumpet played without any electronic effects. The basic sound. I'm not talking about the innovations that the musicians create on stage via their performance, but the basic sound is known. It's not novel. So, what do you do to interject novelty, originality, an overplayed word, but we'll use it for now, and intrigue and interest into the music? Well, this has to come from the harmony. It has to come from the rhythm. It has to come from the intonation. It has to come from the melody line. It has to come from the hooks that you might write. And in this sense, acoustic music does force people in some ways to create interest through the compositional, improvisational, and performance paradigm, if you will, compared to electronic music if it's played badly. Mind you, acoustic music played badly is boring. Acoustic music played well has all of these wonderful qualities that we discussed in this discussion that I'm referencing. But let's take electric music, plugged in music, if it's played by people who aren't very good musicians. If you wanted to fool the audience into making them think that you're doing something more interesting than you in fact are, you could play one riff on a Hammond organ, then, put a boss chorus on that Hammond organ, change the sound entirely, play another riff, then play it on a Moog synthesizer, then a Fender Rhodes, then have the guitarist play it with a chorus effect, then have him play it with a flanged effect, then have him play it while putting his foot on the wah-wah pedal. And all of a sudden, you have the exact same notes in the same sequence, the same rhythmic pattern, the same key, but the sound quality differs. And again, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. One of the great things about electronic music is that you can create so many different kinds of sounds. I mean, think about it. A Moog synthesizer, a modular Moog synthesizer, is capable of having thousands of different sonic combinations. And because it's a modular synth, it's really technically an infinite number of sound manipulations, because it's up to the artist playing the Moog synthesizer how he or she is going to alter that sound. Where a grand piano, arguably maybe three sounds. You've got your dampen pedal, you've got your sustain pedal, you can sort of pluck the strings as some do, you can put various mutes and dampeners in the piano itself as some pianists do. But on the whole, there's only a limited number of sounds you can get from a grand piano, whereas a Moog synthesizer, like I said, is infinite. And both of those things have great possibilities. In restricting your sound palette, the grand piano forces the creative artist to explore the possibilities of interesting chord sequences, radically original harmonies, interesting rhythms. And likewise, the instrument like a Moog synthesizer, where so many different sound combinations are possible, that creates a whole nother form of opportunity opportunity from the infinite nature of the instrument. Now, a bad artist, I mean, there's no good or bad, but let's just say an artist with limited creative capacity will look at the infinite possibilities of the Moog synthesizer, and this person will be frightened into submission. There's too much choice. It would be like sort of walking into a Costco and not knowing where to begin, which I get in sales. There's something to that, which is why they put the candy by the register. But a creative person would say, right, I know the pattern I'm going to go. I know that I'm going to go to the, supplements first and the chicken second and the beach towels third. And, I hate to reduce music to a warehouse big box shopping experience, but hey, I'm trying to make this show relatable. No Rick Beato me. But a creative person, when faced with, let's say, a plethora of effects pedals for guitars, the versatility and ubiquitous and infinite nature of the sound possibilities on a Moog synthesizer, they'll see that as a sort of land to be conquered. Likewise, the creative person, who may well in some cases be the same person, will see the limited sound palette of the grand piano and think, I can do things that are so harmonically interesting. I will make the sounds of these keys on an instrument that everyone is all too familiar with, and I can make them interesting. And I think that's one of the great things about the creative process. The creative process is something that can have a fire ignited under it, both through limitation and through that which is infinite. And if you can approach both of those things without fear or without reservation, then you'll truly be a creative person, my son, if you want to paraphrase Kipling there. So, in terms of what's better or worse, acoustic or plugged in music, I again, going back to my original thoughts on this, I love it both. And there are some people that excel at one rather than the other, mainly because of experience or inclination. But on the whole, I would say that there are truly great artists who can do both, even if they prefer one over the other. I mean, Keith Jarrett rebelled against electronic instruments, and for the majority of his career after that rebellion, he would only play not only on a grand piano, but on a grand piano that was tuned just the way he liked it. He was very fussy about his instruments, and if you're Keith Jarrett, you can be. But don't forget, when Keith Jarrett was with Miles and playing electric, he was damn good at it. So he could do both. Chick Corea could do both and did do both. Jan Hammer, probably more known for his electronic, but his acoustic piano music, very, very good. Jean-Luc Ponty did acoustic and electric violin and did both very, very well. Look at the great guitarist. Speaking of Rick Beato, I just saw his interview with the great Al Di Meola, a man who I would say, if there was anyone whose electric and acoustic technique is more similar than almost any other guitar player, that would probably be Al Di Meola. He plays the electric with the kind of precision required for sort of neoclassical and Latin-based acoustic guitar, and yet he plays acoustic guitar with all of the sort of joie de vivre of an electric guitar. He can even get it with just his left hand to almost sort of sustain itself, which is normally something that you would do with an electric guitar with the help of amplification. And so look at Steve Hackett, a guitarist for Genesis. His acoustic stuff, I love. I almost like his acoustic stuff more, but again, equally good at both from a different genre. And then there are some that really only did one. McCoy Tyner, wonderful, and pretty much only played acoustic. Wes Montgomery never really played acoustic that I'm aware of. I'm sure he did, but not much. But at the same time, he never went into all of the effects. For him, it was always no effects with a hollow body, and that was it. And it was wonderful. Ron Carter, as a bass player, most known for acoustic, but he has played electric, and he is damn good at both. Stanley Clarke plays the contrabasso like an electric bass, and he plays his electric bass guitar like a contrabasso. So again, what does this all mean? Well, it means that the truly great artists have a unique versatility, no matter which sort of space they're in, so to speak. And that's sort of my thoughts on that. Um, Another thing that I wanted to talk about, and I want to maybe add this to the description, but I'm not sure if I can do that while I'm live. I might have to do that. Afterwards. There's a guy that I've talked about before. He's got, I think his presence online is mainly on X, formerly known as Twitter, and he's called Foundring, a wonderful pianist. And he's been doing some things. I think he's been doing it for a couple of weeks now. I caught the last one, but a friend sent the first one to me. And this is he's doing Saturday afternoon, depending on your time zone, live streams on X. And these are ragtime live streams, ragtime and stride with a bit of modern jazz. I think he said Dave Brubeck is sort of as far to what we consider sort of modern jazz as he goes. But what's really interesting is there are not a lot of virtuosos, which is what he is, playing stride and ragtime. And on his stream, he explained that when you compare it to even the most sophisticated forms of modern jazz and even much classical repertoire, stride and ragtime is, at least in his analysis, the most demanding of any piano based genre. And he does like these 3 hour plus streams. It's like the Joe Rogan experience of solo piano every Saturday afternoon. He's in California, so it's afternoon his time. And he's really good. Now, I mentioned him before because he's a satirist in the style of Leher and in the style of, well, he's much more scathing than Weird Al. I mean, his stuff, if you like South Park and Family Guy and Beavis and Butthead and that style of humor, you'll like his stuff. If you're easily offended, you won't like his satire stuff. But what's great about his streams is that it's for everyone. It's all instrumental, no lyrics, so nothing for you to get offended by. But what he does on these streams is he shows off his virtuosity, and he's got a real amazing encyclopedic knowledge of the ragtime and stride movements. People like Scott Joplin and Jelly Roll Morton and so many others going into the Art Tatum era, and he's just a font of musical capability and knowledge. So I definitely recommend, if you have access to X, Twitter as some still call it, to definitely check him out. His Saturday streams, long may they continue, because I, for one, think that they are really, really cool. And so that brings us to what I guess is our final topic, which is not a scandal, but definitely something going on at MOFI, Mobile Fidelity Sound Labs, that I think is incredibly unfortunate. And I want to read something that they put out. I'm really glad that they put it out rather than sort of leaving people to guess, because transparency is important, but it raises so many questions. So here it is. Our SACD manufacturing partner will soon pause production to perform maintenance. All SACD production will hold until summer. This is February, mind you. Get your SACDs today. So here's the problem. The audiophile industry has really become something of a double-edged sword. In many ways, there are more audiophile companies putting out audiophile music than ever before. In the 70s, there was MOFI, FSL as it's sometimes referred to, who were in many ways certainly the first non-exclusively classical audiophile company to do that thing. And then others came along like Nautilus and Superdisc, and even CBS Records had their own sub-label, Master Sound. There were a few others at that time. And then in the 90s came Analog Productions, Acoustic Sounds, Classic Records, which then folded, but was acquired by Analog Productions. And you have some others like Speaker's Corner, Impex, and a few others. And frankly, there now, I would say, more than there used to be if you include sort of the semi-audiophile alongside the audiophile. But not all is well in the world of audiophile, because when the world unfortunately shut down in 2020, supply chains really got effed in the A. And that really hurt the audiophile market. 2020 itself was a great year for them because everyone was home. But then when the rubber hit the road, we saw just how delayed things were because of supply chains. Then inflation came because of what the government did, and things have become really delayed. Release dates have become less and less reliable by almost all of these major audiophile companies. And when you add the legal problems that various licensing agencies have with the licensees, things can get pretty bad. Now, MoFi rectified this last year when they opened up their own vinyl pressing plant. But fate loves irony, because just as they opened up their own vinyl pressing plant, which finally has allowed them to put out their LPs within less than 5 years. I mean, you used to have literally like 5 years to wait between an announcement and a release beginning in like 2020, 2021. I'm exaggerating, but not by much. And they've generally rectified that problem with the vinyl, but now that same problem is happening with SACDs. And this is because there are only a few plants in the world that make them. There's one in Japan, there's one in Austria, of all places, and I believe that there's conflicting reports about whether Sony still operates one in the US. Now, you might be thinking, well, SACD, who cares? It's a niche format. Well, lawyers have kept it alive, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Now, when it comes to high quality digital, there really is zero advantage or zero disadvantage of having a physical format. With analog, of course, it's all in the physical realm, unless you digitize it, of course. But with digital, if you had a DSD download or theoretically a DSD stream at a 64 sample rate, then or bit rate rather. I always get this confused, but you know what I'm trying to say. It would be not just in theory, but in practice, it would sound exactly the same as an SACD. So you out there in Radioland might be thinking, well, what the hell's the point of an SACD? And except for people who just enjoy holding a physical disc in their hand with the box and everything, the packaging, there is no point, because you can get the exact same quality sound through a download, or like I said, theoretically through a stream. What then is the problem? Lawyers. Let me explain what I mean. The record labels that own the master rights to these original recordings, they want to have the lion's share of the market. And that generally means streaming followed by downloads with physical formats way below. And so when you have audiophile labels that are willing to press high quality records, they'll usually license it so long as it's not a record label that wants to release one of their own albums. And when the audiophile labels, whether Analog Productions or MoFi, want to do a 45 RPM of what used to be a 33 and a third album, they're all the more willing to license it, because that is so niche and so audiophile, it doesn't really compete with, let's say, the $25 stuff that a Rhino might put out. Now, SACDs continue to exist at companies like MoFi and Analog Productions for much the same reason. Acoustic Sounds, Analog Productions, used to put out DSD downloads of all of the stuff that they also released on SACD. And then the lawyers made the licensing impossible for that, because the record labels themselves thought, we want to release our own high res versions, even though those would usually be FLAC rather than DSD, and they might not always be mastered by the kinds of talented people that Analog Productions would employ. People like Kevin Gray and Matt Luthans and Bernie Grunman, and back before his retirement, Steve Hoffman. And so it was a big bummer when they prevented Acoustic Sounds from doing that, even though logically that would make the most sense. What would make the most sense is for the SACD to just die, and for these companies, these record labels, these rights owners, to allow Analog Productions once again, and MoFi for the first time ever, to just sell downloads. You don't have to worry about streaming that way. Let the record labels have their own shitty masterings on the streaming services, and let the audiophile labels sell from their download store, like Analog Productions used to do, a DSD, or for that matter, a 24 192 PCM version of your favorite record. It's really a shame that greed has got the better of this, but What it shows is that greed is only part of the story. Uncreative people see a problem and they don't bother finding a solution. Creative people, and this goes back to the musicians we were talking about earlier, because in business you have to be almost as creative as you have to be in the arts. A truly creative person, love him or hate him, I like him. Someone like Elon Musk, they find a problem, and no matter how big the problem, they will find a solution, even if they have to make that solution with their bare hands. I really admire people like that. And someone out there in the audiophile world needs to, for lack of a better word, some people love it, some people don't, have the art of the deal between the people who own these master rights and the audiophile companies, so that in a manner that allows both sides to have some sort of profit margin that they'll be happy with to sell these downloads. Because with this SACD plant, MOFI hasn't said which one, but I suspect it's the one in Austria. With this one going down for 3 months for maintenance, they claim it will open up in the summer. Who the hell knows if that's true? We need to just have a consensus that, look, physical formats should be relegated to the analog realm where they are needed, because there is no analog in the cloud. So let the great 45 RPM LPs, let the reel-to-reel tape that Analog Productions and a few others are still coming out with, let that run wild. It's wonderful stuff. And in the digital realm, let the download and the stream rule. And for the heavy audiophile things where streaming might be a huge licensing problem, let people download it. I guarantee you people will pay the exact same price for a DSD or even a FLAC PCM download that they would for the physical SACD, thereby increasing the profit margin, because you don't have to worry about packaging and shipping and insurance and all of that. Someone really needs to make it happen. And that way, the labels can focus on pressing their LPs. The few of them that make reel-to-reel tapes still do that. And then on the digital realm, let it all be in the cloud for us to download. The SACD sounds great, but you don't need the disc anymore. You have DSD downloads. You can play DSD on Fubar, which is a free media player. You can buy others like J River and so many others. Let modernity rule. Don't let lawyers and licensing agreements get in the way of progress. When it comes to digital, we need to say goodbye to physical formats and embrace downloads. And we would and could, if only the people in charge of the licensing would let us. Someone creative ought to make it happen. Someone at MOFI and Analog Productions and the other companies should maybe hold some roundtable meeting with the license holders and say, let's make a deal. DSD downloads are always going to be a niche, but it is there. We can make it so that both sides have a decent profit margin. They'll be cheaper than the LPs, same price as the SACD, which automatically means profit margin goes up. Everyone should be happy. Someone needs to make it happen. These delays are getting ridiculous, especially when it's in a format that can be cheaply and easily replaced by a download. That's what I think, though. Let me know what you think. And as always, like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Take care.